The progressive conservative victory in PEI on Tuesday represents the latest in a series of wins for right-leaning parties across the country. Joining us now to explain what this could mean ahead of the upcoming federal election is the Globe and Mail's Adam Radwanski. Adam, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning.
Okay, so 5 provinces have elected conservative, small c conservative governments all within the past year. So you got PEI, New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, they were Liberal. Alberta was NDP. Now all of them are conservative blue. Why are Canadians tilting right?
I mean, I think you have to differentiate a little bit. So if you look at, say, Alberta, where there's kind of a hard right turn, although back to the norm a little bit, versus PEI, where I don't think it's that big a turn. But what I take away partly is there is a bit of a rightward turn. Partly there's just a real change dynamic. I mean, when you look from election to election, it's almost hard to remember the last provincial government that got reelected. I think Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan before that. But otherwise, when you go through, almost every election seems to bring change, which I think speaks to a kind of a restlessness across the electorate.
Well, and I guess it depends on what narrative you want to marry yourself to. You know, do you want to marry yourself to the notion of a blue wave that's cresting across the country, or are these simply checks, provincial checks on the federal government? Are people simply saying, we like what's going on in Ottawa, but not so much that we want to give that person unfettered access to sort of the levers of power on the provincial level? Like, what do you think this means for October in Ottawa? Well,
I think it has to worry the Liberals, again, because of that change dynamic to a point. I do think that it can help them a little bit where they have that kind of counterbalancing. I mean, Ontario, for instance, has that history where when they elect Conservative provincially, it's often Liberal federally and vice versa. It does also give the Liberals some foils. I wouldn't say PEI so much, but again, somewhere like Alberta or Ontario, they're not going to mind campaigning a little bit against Jason Kenney or against especially Doug Ford. So it does give them that kind of on the upside.
But does that also run the risk of them running against the most recent choices that electorate has made?
It does, and it also risks giving the impression generally of a sense of chaos or a sense of not being able to move together, and it could lead to a kind of a fatigue. I mean, I'm not sure how much voters want to see their federal and provincial governments fighting. I think on both sides, I mean, both the federal Liberals and various provincial conservative governments, again, the more kind of hardline conservative ones, there's a nice chance for them to kind of rally their bases. I do wonder how people who are kind of in the middle or, who don't have strong allegiances to either side, how they take that if they just see them fighting with each other.
Conventional wisdom used to say that election victories federally went through Ontario and Quebec. They still hold so many of the seats. But how important was Atlantic Canada to the Liberals in their last victory, and what does it mean that so much of it is blue now?
I think it was extremely important. They won every single seat there in the last election, all 32. I don't think they can expect to win every single one. And there are provinces, for instance, New Brunswick, there's a couple of seats there where realistically they're probably not going to win in most elections. But to keep a majority government, if that's their hope in October, they probably need to win almost every seat in Atlantic Canada. And what we've seen here is, both in New Brunswick and now in PEI and potentially in Newfoundland in May, changes in government toward a more conservative government. And again, it just looks as though people there aren't necessarily okay with the status quo. And that's been, traditionally, particularly in places with some economic challenges, not so much PEI, but some of the other provinces, that often does lead to a dissatisfaction with the status quo. So I think they do have cause to be worried there about how much they can keep.
I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things for me to watch is how each party is going to interpret this new political landscape and what that means in terms of messaging and policy platforms that they put out there.
I'm particularly interested to see how the Liberals react to what's happened in Alberta, because there's going to be a real temptation for them to go quite hard to embrace a fight with Jason Kenney, and that could play well in a couple of the provinces you mentioned, particularly British Columbia and Quebec. On the other hand, it could also lead to something approaching a national unity crisis. So I think you do have to wonder how much they're going to walk into that.
Well, we hope that you'll come back and join us and keep us up to speed as we get closer and closer to the election. Adam, thank you for being here.
Thank you.